Welcome back, everybody. Ready to dive into another fascinating topic. Today, we're going to be looking at the 1920 silent film, The Golem. How he came into the world.
Ooh, a classic.
Yeah, and, it's one of those that gets labeled as horror, but there's just so much more going on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even just thinking about when it was made, Germany in the 1920s.
Right after World War I.
Exactly. So much social upheaval, rising anti-Semitism. You can't separate that from the film.
It's like baked right in.
Yeah, it uses the golem almost as a lens to explore all those anxieties about identity and the
And
other.
that's what's so interesting about this portrayal of the golem, right?
Yeah.
You've got the classic folklore, this powerful being made from clay who protects the Jewish people, but this film kind of flips the script.
Yeah, it definitely adds a layer of complexity to it.
Yeah.
You can't just say he's a hero or a villain. He's both.
It's like this double-edged sword.
Exactly. On one hand, he's a symbol of strength, the embodiment of the Jewish community's resilience against oppression.
Especially when they're literally facing expulsion from Prague.
Right, there's a real threat, and the golem is there to defend them.
But then there's that potential for destruction, that untamed power.
Absolutely. He's not just a simple good guy. There's this real tension between his capacity for good and the potential for harm.
And it's not just the golem who's morally ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Even the supposed good guys are kind of shady.
Oh, yeah. Think about Knight Florian, the guy who's supposed to deliver the expulsion decree.
He falls for Miriam, the rabbi's daughter.
And suddenly his motivations become a lot more difficult to read. Is he genuinely in love with her? Or is it something more sinister, like is he using his position to take advantage of the situation?
The film leaves you hanging. It's like it wants you to wrestle with those questions.
Exactly. And just when you think you've got it figured out, you've got the rabbi's assistant who decides to bring the golem to life himself, and not for the most selfless reasons.
Jealousy's a hell of a motivator.
It really is. And in this case, it leads to some serious consequences.
Especially for poor Florian.
It's a really tragic element of the story. And again, it shows that even within a community facing persecution from the outside, there are these internal conflicts and desires that can lead to destruction.
So much for clear-cut good versus evil, huh?
Right. It's one of the things that makes the golem so different from your typical horror flick.
It's not just about cheap scares.
It's a spectacle, a fairy tale designed to make you think and feel uncomfortable.
It gets under your skin.
Exactly. And it's all thanks to the man behind the monster, Paul Wegener. He directed, co-wrote, and even starred as the golem himself.
Talk about a triple threat.
And what's even more fascinating is his relationship with the Nazi Party. It's really complex and adds this whole other dimension to the film's message.
So it's like, wait a minute, you're making a film about the persecution of Jews while being involved with the very group that will later perpetrate the Holocaust. It just makes you question everything.
It really does. How are we supposed to interpret this? What was Wegener trying to say? It's a question scholars are still debating today.
It's one of those things that the more you dig, the more complicated it gets.
Absolutely. The Golem is a film that defies easy categorization. It's horror, but it's also a powerful social commentary. It's a spectacle, but it's also a deeply personal story. And that's just part of what makes it so captivating, even nearly a century later.
It's really incredible, too, like just how visually striking this film is. It's a prime example of early German Expressionism.
Oh, yeah. You can't talk about the Golem without talking about the visuals.
Right. And especially for a silent film, it had to rely so heavily on those visuals to tell the story and create those emotions.
Lots about atmosphere and mood.
Exactly. And the Golem just nails it. The black and white cinematography, the dramatic lighting, the stylized sets.
Oh, and those sets, so distorted and angular, like a nightmare brought to life.
Yeah, it's all very deliberate. It's not just about making things look cool. It's about expressing something deeper, using those visuals to tap into those themes of fear, isolation, and that underlying societal unease.
It's like the world itself is a reflection of the character's inner turmoil. Exactly, and those expressionistic visuals, they really amplify those feelings. They make the audience feel it on a visceral level.
It's one thing to see a monster on screen, but it's another to feel like the world itself is monstrous.
Right, and that's what makes the Golem so effective. I mean, we've talked a lot about how it breaks free from typical horror conventions, but are there any moments where it does lean into those classic tropes?
Good question. I mean, the Golem himself, despite all the symbolism, is still this imposing, powerful figure.
Oh, yeah. There are definitely scenes where he's downright terrifying, especially when he's rampaging through the ghetto.
Which brings us back to that duality we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
He's a protector, but he's also a force of nature that can easily turn destructive.
Precisely, and that unpredictable nature makes him so compelling. You never quite know what he's going to do next. He's not just a monster hiding under the bed. He's a complex figure who embodies both the hopes and fears of the Jewish community.
You know, it's funny. When we first decided to do this deep dive, I kept thinking about Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, I see the connection.
I know they're different stories, but I can't help but see some parallels.
It's a common comparison, and it makes sense. Both films explore the idea of a man-made being that spirals out of control, pushing the boundaries of creation and forcing us to think about the consequences of playing God.
Right, but there are key differences too.
Of course, the Golem is brought to life through magic, not science.
And his roots are in Jewish mysticism and folklore.
Exactly. Whereas Frankenstein's monster is born from a more scientific worldview.
So while both stories grapple with the consequences of creation, the Golem is more focused on those themes of cultural identity and persecution.
Which are woven into the Golem's very existence. He's not just a monster, he's a symbol of a community fighting to survive.
And speaking of survival, it's incredible how the Golem has stood the test of time. I mean, it's over 100 years old and we're still talking about it today.
It's a testament to those enduring themes: identity, prejudice, the yearning for protection, the fear of the other. These are human issues that transcend time. They're just as relevant today as they were back then.
And honestly, the visuals still hold up too. Those expressionistic sets, the stark cinematography, it's also captivating.
It's a film that stays with you long after you've seen it, and that's the sign of a truly great film.
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away praising the film itself, let's circle back to Paul Widgener for a moment. We touched on his complicated relationship with the Nazi Party earlier, but I'd love to dig a little deeper.
It's a fascinating and frankly troubling aspect of the film's legacy.
I mean, here you have this film about the persecution of a minority group, and then you have the director who, to some degree, was involved with the very ideology that fueled that persecution. How do we reconcile that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some believe Wegener was just trying to navigate a very dangerous political landscape, while others point to his willingness to work within the Nazi system as evidence of his own questionable beliefs.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape.
Exactly. It's a reminder that looking back at art through a historical lens can be complicated. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, to question our assumptions, and to recognize just how complex history and the people who lived through it really are.
It's like the deeper you dive, the more you realize how much lies beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this exploration so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes you think, how can a film from 1920 still be so relevant today?
Well, it speaks to those universal themes, right? Identity, prejudice, the fear of the other. Those are things that we're still grappling with today.
It's like the Golem is holding up a mirror to society and saying, hey, this is who you are. This is what you're capable of.
And that's what makes it more than just a horror film. It becomes a social commentary, a warning, a plea for understanding and tolerance.
So what can we take away from all this? I mean, we've spent this whole deep dive exploring this film, its context,
Right.
and the man who created it.
Well, I think one of the key takeaways is that the past isn't really that distant. The issues that the Golem explores, they're still very much present in our world.
It's a reminder to really examine those things in our own lives.
Yeah.
Our own prejudices, our own fears.
And to recognize those things in the world around us and to actively work towards a more just and equitable future.
Because we can do better. We have to do better.
Absolutely. And the Golem serves as that powerful call to action, a reminder that we have a responsibility to learn from history and to build a better future.
And it's a call to action packaged in this incredibly compelling and visually stunning work of art.
Exactly. It's both entertaining and thought-provoking.
Well, folks, that brings our deep dive into the Golem to a close. We hope you enjoyed exploring this film with us as much as we did.
It's a film that continues to challenge and captivate audiences even after all these years.
And we encourage you to keep the conversation going. Seek out the film, read more about it, share your thoughts with others.
Because by keeping these stories alive, we can learn from the past and work towards a better future.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds engaged.